Most people think they know why woolly mammoths went extinct. The Ice Age ended. The climate warmed. The mammoths could not adapt. They died. It is a clean, comfortable explanation. It is also almost entirely wrong. Mammoths as a lineage had survived over 20 glacial cycles across more than 2 million years. Woolly mammoths themselves emerged later, but they too had already endured major climatic swings before their extinction. They had lived through periods warmer than today. They had adapted to environments ranging from frozen tundra to temperate grassland. These were not fragile animals teetering on the edge of survival. They were one of the most resilient large mammals that ever lived. And yet they vanished within a few thousand years on every continent, almost simultaneously. The real story of why involves a perfect collision of forces: climate, humans, genetics, and an island that science has only recently begun to untangle fully. And at the end of that story is a question that nobody in the Ice Age could have imagined asking. Should we bring them back? Because right now, somebody is trying to. Before we talk about why they died, we need to correct something else most people get wrong about how they lived. The woolly mammoth was not simply a hairy elephant. It was a distinct species, Mammothus primigenius, that had been evolving separately from the Asian elephant lineage for roughly 6 million years. By the time of the last Ice Age, it was a distinct species from modern elephants, closely related, but shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of separate evolution. Its cold weather adaptations were extraordinary. A dense, woolly undercoat, up to 30 centimeters thick, trapped body heat with an efficiency that no modern elephant can match. Over that, a coarser outer layer of guard hairs, sometimes reaching a meter in length, shed ice and moisture. Beneath the skin, a fat layer up to 9 centimeters thick provided both insulation and an energy reserve for winter months when food was scarce. Even its blood had adapted. A 2010 study published in Nature Genetics found that mammoth hemoglobin had evolved to release oxygen more efficiently in cold temperatures than modern elephant hemoglobin, a molecular adaptation that had no precedent in the fossil record. But the most important thing about the woolly mammoth was not its fur. It was what it did to the landscape around it. Mammoths were ecosystem engineers. Their grazing kept the mammoth steppe, the vast grassland that stretched from Western Europe across Siberia and into North America, open and productive. They broke up shrubs, knocked down young trees before forests could establish, and compacted snow with their weight, which kept permafrost cold and stable. Remove the mammoths, and the steppe transformed. The grassland gave way to moss, shrub, and eventually forest, a transformation with consequences that reach, quite literally, into the present day. At their peak, woolly mammoths ranged across the northern hemisphere in numbers estimated in the hundreds of thousands, possibly more. They had outlasted ice ages, volcanic winters, and sea level changes that restructured entire continents. They were not strangers to climate change. This is the myth that needs dismantling most urgently. The Pleistocene epoch, the 2.5 million year period during which mammoths lived, was characterized by repeated glacial cycles. Roughly every 100,000 years, the climate swung between glacial maximum and warmer interglacial. The mammoths rode those swings. They contracted their range during warm periods and expanded it during cold ones. They adapted their diet. They moved. Their lineage had persisted through repeated glacial cycles, expanding during cold phases and contracting during warmer ones. So if climate change alone cannot explain their extinction, what can? The answer begins with a footprint, a human footprint. Coexistence between mammoths and humans in Eurasia lasted tens of thousands of years. The cave paintings of Lascaux and Font-de-Gaume in France, some dating to over 17,000 years ago, depict mammoths in confident, detailed brushwork that could only come from people who had watched these animals closely for generations. Mammoth bones were used as structural supports for shelters in Ukraine. Mammoth ivory was carved into figurines, musical instruments, and tools across Ice Age Europe. These were not people driving mammoths to extinction. They were people living alongside them, hunting selectively, taking what they needed. The relationship was sustainable, for a time. Approximately 14,000 years ago, things began to change. The climate was warming, genuinely and significantly. The last glacial maximum was ending. The Mammoth Steppe, which had covered millions of square kilometers, began to shrink as rising temperatures shifted vegetation zones northward. Grassland gave way to forest in the south. The habitat that mammoths depended upon was contracting. At the same time, human populations were growing. Tools were improving. Hunting strategies were becoming more coordinated and more efficient. The selective, sustainable hunting of earlier millennia was giving way to something more intensive. Neither factor alone would have been sufficient. Mammoths had survived warmer climates before, and humans had coexisted with them for tens of thousands of years without causing collapse. But together, habitat loss compressing populations into smaller areas and intensified hunting targeting those compressed populations, the combination was lethal. Think of it this way. A population under climate stress is like a patient with a weakened immune system. Hunting pressure is the infection. Separately, survivable. Together, fatal. A landmark 2023 study published in Nature used ancient DNA from mammoth specimens across Eurasia to model population dynamics over time. The findings were striking. Mammoth genetic diversity, a measure of population health, began declining sharply around the same period that human populations expanded and climate warming intensified. The two pressures hit simultaneously, and the mammoths never recovered. By 10,000 years ago, continental mammoth populations were gone. Every mainland herd on every continent had collapsed within a few thousand years of this convergence, but not all of them. Here is the fact that stops most people cold. The last woolly mammoth on Earth died 4,000 years ago. Not 10,000, 4,000. The Egyptian pyramids at Giza were already standing. The Bronze Age was underway. The Indus Valley civilization was at its peak. And on a small Arctic island north of Siberia, called Wrangel Island, a population of woolly mammoths was still alive, isolated by rising sea levels that had cut the island off from the mainland thousands of years earlier. Isolated from human hunters, and with a habitat that remained suitable, the Wrangel Island mammoths survived long after their mainland relatives had gone. They even shrank, a well-documented evolutionary process called island dwarfism, where large animals on islands evolve smaller body sizes over generations in response to limited resources. The Wrangel mammoths were noticeably smaller than their mainland ancestors. But isolation came with a cost. A 2022 study published in Nature by Love Darlin and colleagues at the Center for Paleogenetics sequenced the genomes of multiple Wrangel Island mammoths across different time periods. What they found was sobering. The isolated population, cut off from the genetic diversity of mainland herds, was accumulating harmful mutations over time, errors in the genome that a larger, more diverse population would have purged through natural selection. But that persisted and multiplied in a small, inbred group. By the time of the last Wrangel mammoths, the researchers found evidence of dysfunction in genes related to smell, sperm development, and neurological function. The isolated population showed signs of accumulating harmful mutations, though later research suggests some of the most damaging mutations may have been partially purged over time. When humans did reach Wrangel Island, approximately 3,400 years ago, the mammoths were already compromised. Shortly after this period, the mammoths disappeared, though whether humans played a direct role remains unresolved. Not hunted to extinction in the dramatic sense, simply pushed past a threshold they were already approaching. By their final centuries, the Wrangel mammoths were a small, isolated population with reduced genetic diversity. But recent genomic work suggests they were not simply collapsing under genetic load. Their extinction may have required an additional trigger, perhaps extreme weather, disease, or a sudden environmental shift. Human involvement remains possible, but not definitively proven. What makes the woolly mammoth unlike almost any other extinct animal is what the permafrost preserved. In 2007, a reindeer herder in the Yamal Peninsula of Siberia discovered a mammoth calf in melting permafrost. She was 42,000 years old. She was named Lyuba, after the herder's wife. And she was extraordinary. Lyuba was so well preserved that her skin, organs, and stomach contents were intact. Analysis of her stomach revealed her last meal, her mother's milk, mixed with the dung of adult mammoths, which infant elephants consume to acquire gut bacteria. She had been nursing. She was approximately 1 month old when she died, probably by inhaling mud while crossing a riverbank. 42,000 years old, and we know her last meal. That is what permafrost preservation means. Specimens like Lyuba have allowed researchers to sequence the woolly mammoth genome in remarkable detail. The full genome was published in 2015, making the mammoth one of the most completely genetically characterized extinct animals in history. Comparison with the Asian elephant genome, the mammoth's closest living relative, sharing approximately 99.6% of its DNA, has identified the specific genes that gave mammoths their cold weather adaptations, the hemoglobin modifications, the fat metabolism genes, the hair growth genes. This genetic knowledge is precisely what makes the next chapter of the mammoth story possible. If you have made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel is made for. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. And if the de-extinction story we are about to cover interests you, our previous video on the asteroid extinction aftermath is linked in the description. In 2021, a company called Colossal Biosciences was founded in Dallas, Texas, with a single stated goal: to resurrect the woolly mammoth. The science behind the attempt is not science fiction, it is gene editing, specifically using CRISPR technology to modify the genome of Asian elephant cells, inserting mammoth-specific gene variants for cold adaptation, fat storage, and hair growth. The result would not be a true woolly mammoth. It would be a cold-adapted Asian elephant, carrying the functional traits of a mammoth in the body of its closest living relative. A proxy, an ecological stand-in. George Church of Harvard Medical School, one of the pioneers of CRISPR gene editing, is among the scientists involved. The team has already identified over 50 genes that differ meaningfully between mammoths and Asian elephants. Progress on editing those genes into elephant cell lines has been reported, though a living animal remains years away at minimum. But here is the question nobody is asking loudly enough. Even if we can bring back something like a mammoth, should we? The ecological argument for doing so is surprisingly strong. The mammoth step that mammoths maintained stored enormous quantities of carbon in its frozen permafrost soils. As that permafrost thaws, accelerated by climate change, it releases methane and carbon dioxide, further accelerating warming. Restoring large grazing herbivores to the Arctic could, in theory, compact snow, keep permafrost cold, and slow that release. The Pleistocene Park project in Siberia, run by Sergei and Nikita Zimov, has been testing this idea since the 1990s, reintroducing bison, horses, and reindeer to rewild sections of Siberian tundra. Field experiments in Siberia suggest that areas with large grazing animals can have colder ground temperatures and reduced thaw depth compared to ungrazed areas. The principle works. A mammoth-like animal could amplify the effect at scale. The counter-arguments are also serious. The ecosystem the mammoth shaped no longer exists in the form it once took. The mammoth steppe is gone. The plant communities, the predator assemblages, the ecological relationships that made the mammoth functional in its environment have been absent for 10,000 years. Introducing a cold-adapted elephant into modern Siberia would not restore the Pleistocene. It would create something new, an experiment with unpredictable outcomes. And there is the ethical dimension. We would be creating an animal, a highly intelligent, socially complex animal, without the herd structure, the learned behaviors, or the ecological context that its biology was built for. The first mammoth proxy would be born into a world it was not made for, raised by humans without its kind. These are not reasons to stop the science. They are reasons to take the questions seriously. The woolly mammoth did not go extinct because of the Ice Age. It went extinct because of a collision of pressures, climate stress, human hunting, habitat loss, and finally genetic exhaustion that converged within a few thousand years and overwhelmed an animal that had survived everything else the Pleistocene had thrown at it. We were not the only cause, but we were the decisive one. The continental populations collapsed precisely where and when human hunting pressure intensified. The island population, the one place humans did not reach for thousands of years, survived until the moment they did. The pattern is too consistent across too many species and too many continents to read any other way. And now, for the first time in the history of life on Earth, the species responsible for an extinction is attempting to reverse it. Whether that is wisdom or hubris is a question the next decade will begin to answer. The science is moving faster than the ethics. The first cold-adapted elephant calf, if Colossal's timeline holds, could be born within this decade. What we do with it, and what we owe the world we have already changed, are questions we are not yet ready to answer. The woolly mammoth walked this earth for hundreds of thousands of years. It shaped entire continents. It fed human populations, inspired human art, and built ecosystems that stored carbon and cooled the Arctic. It deserved better than what it got. Whether what comes next counts as making that right, that is up to us to decide. They survived the Ice Age. They survived 20 glacial cycles. They survived everything the Pleistocene threw at them. They did not survive us.